You start babbling and I'll fix it. I think that's what we always do, right?
Yeah, that's our modus operandi. Yeah, that's how we. This is how we roll here.
Yeah, yeah. Don't worry. I mean, it's good content, but I mean, it is babbling. Let's be honest.
Well, yeah, it would work without the content as well, I guess, by
Oh
now.
yeah, we should have just a chat show, just me, you, and our friend Business Processes.
Welcome to the What's Your Baseline podcast, where we demystify enterprise architecture and business process management.
We're here to bring best practices and lessons learned from our years to your ears, as well as interviewing friends we met along the way on our professional journeys.
My name is Roland, and I'm joined today by my co-host, JM Erlinson. And welcome back. JM, now that you have you had the opportunity to get your grievances out of the system,
Yeah,
I hope you feel better.
I
Let's
do not,
talk
not
about
yet.
not yet. Oh, yeah, well, we got another 20 minutes. Now let's talk about what you would suggest, how the standard should be changed so that JM, the master of all process design, uh, will be happy.
Well, Roland, let's start. And you and I both have talked about this extensively, but we're going to bounce back and forth between the two of us because I want to get your thoughts and I would like to get your ideas on this as well. Because let's start
Okay,
with the very first BPM
all right.
3.0.
Just one thing. Just one
Yeah.
thing. Keep in mind, I think BPMN 2.0 is perfect. Perfect. So talk
There's
me
no
out
way
of
you
it.
think that's true, though. My goodness, Roland
Right?
Bolt, folks, are lying to you right off the bat in our section 2. He does not think it's perfect. But let's go with the first piece of the puzzle. So, Roland, let's talk about model types included in the BPMN spec.
Mhm.
So, I think a clear definition and segmentation between high-level process models, business process models, and sub-processes or task-level models needs to be established. That's the sort of three-level hierarchy, something we saw in SAP with scenario process step, something we see in APQC with their down to the model level, something we see in all these different other types of standards. And BPMN doesn't have that idea of 3 levels of process. I want 3 levels of process and 3 different models for levels of process.
Yeah, I would that even extend. I would say it's N level of processes
Sure,
because
but a minimum
uh,
3.
yeah, I like the idea, the current concept of a sub process is part of the collaboration. It's just encapsulating certain things. I like that. It's not a different level. When I speak with clients, I typically call it level 4 plus, right? Because
Mhm,
in some tools it's a different diagram, but it's conceptually it's the same level. I like that. I want to have more flexibility on top of it, right? When you think about, you
mhm.
mentioned APQC, you have 5 levels where the
Yeah.
current BPMN would be the level 5, the who does what when where. So you need to be able to have higher levels. And I've seen different things where people use collectivity objects, which is also not correct, for that stuff. So do some proper things, like whatever, what I've done, use value chain diagrams and then just have multiple levels of value chains. And the last level is a BPMN, which also
Mhm.
makes it easy when you need to find things.
It's true.
Look for a certain model and it has a different model type, and hooray, it's one of the highest or one of the lower levels. The one thing and that might be me, and I asked our audience to put it in the comments. Um, there are some model types that I have not seen in real life. I've never
Mhm.
seen a conversation, for example, and I even forgot the fourth model type in the spec that I will have to look up because I've never seen that. People use collaborations and they misuse collaborations for sub processes. But anyways, so why the others? Right. And that's an honest question. Have you, dear listeners and watchers, seen these beyond you playing with those model types in real life? I'm really honestly curious. So I agree with you, JM. I think there should be more clarity around the use of the model types. Maybe get rid of some of them. I would not recommend to go back to the BPMN 1.0 thing where the process had everything. So one model type for it. I like the distinction between collaboration and process.
Mhm.
Um, but I would love to see, just like you, the hierarchy. Enable a functional decomposition, because what I've seen in clients is you want to have the vertical decomposition and you want to have the horizontal end-to-ends. And both are not uh, at the current BPMN level.
When I said sub-processing or or task model, one of the things I'll see a ton of in BPMN models, because once again, people are not always using BPMN to model like automations at a level that they can just like click a button and it goes to automation. Like they're using it to model conceptual processes or
Yeah,
logical
that's your private
processes. Like,
process. That's your private non-executable
sure,
process.
but when you look at a sub-process underneath that, we're looking at task level activity. Here, let me give you a good example. One of the activities could be like reconcile, like a three-way match, like perform three-way
Uh-huh.
match, right? Great, you got a delivery. You want to say, is the invoice matching them? The delivery manifest is matching the purchase order. Great, great, okay, great. Um, that three-way match, those steps involved in it, is a lower level model, and could
No,
have, oh yeah, there's a lower level
no.
model to tell you how to do that task, right? So that's a task level model.
It's just for your convenience grouped in an object to make your diagram not having 500 different objects. Checking if the um, number of things you received and the PO and the invoice match is the same level like create invoice or tie shoelaces from a method perspective. It's just for convenience purposes combined to make it more readable. The other thing is, and this is also a misconception when you think about
I don't necessarily
call
agree on this one. I think
call
we're gonna
oh,
fight
I
on
do.
this.
Well, call activities and call sub-processes, right? They might be the same thing, except that they have that reusable code in the background semantics. You know, I don't know how many business analysts, and I'm explicitly not thinking about guys like Matusz, right? Implementers. How many business analysts are using call activities, right? I haven't seen
Right.
a lot of them, right?
Right, and I often see people using call activities in order to string processes together, which is something I wanted to talk about as well,
Oh,
is
which
those
is also
off-page
wrong.
connectors.
Yeah, which is
Terrible,
also,
yeah.
ooh, yeah, which is also
Yeah,
wrong.
terrible.
Yeah, but the point is, and I'm thinking now in other notations, you know, an EPC does not have the concept of a sub-process. You still describe the different activities for your three-way match in an EPC. Is it more complicated? No, right? So it's like a matter of convenience, I guess, that you have the sub-process.
So I think that yes, it is a matter of convenience when you're thinking about it like that. So, but Roland, you're proposing a world where process just means the actual individual tasks and the orders that somebody has to like enter a value here in this field, then enter a value in this field, and then click this button, and then everything else is just a abstraction of that into a level that people can understand it more than the individual task.
No, 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 no. I think there's a level where you have steps that have that encompass a certain, I don't functionality, utility, pick the name of your choice, a
Sure.
certain summarization of things that you might do on a screen, right? There's
Yes.
a level below, which is the actual, how do you decompose that task? Oh, you go to field 1 and type in this. You go to field 2, type in that. You go to field 3, select this, and then you press OK. That is not what I would model at all. That is what I would see as the task level.
Right. But task level models are useful for training. In fact, you have to do that for training. They're what you'll find in an LMS, because that's how you make sure your people who are working in this task are enabled to complete it. And just to give you a sense of things, the reason why I say that I want a low level model is because I think that models are decision levels. And a decision level in process conversation is, should we do three-way matches? There is a separate second decision, is how should we do three-way matches? So that's why I think that's a lower level model, because I don't think of models just as a communication tool. I think it is as a decision place. And yes, someone can say, we need to do those. And someone can say, here's how we can do that. And those might be different people as well. That's why it's not a flat one thing. It is segmented into layers.
So there's that, even though I don't like them, right? Because they clutter the structure, right?
Sure.
There's the concept of the function allocation diagrams in ARIS, right? Where you
Okay.
see the task and you see a screen object that then can be blown off into mock-up screen design models and blah, 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 right? Where you then can say, okay, you have a data object, you draw a line to the field, and you have an activity on the next high level that has a line to the button and whatnot. I think that's, if you want to go down that path, much cleaner than what you propose using the sub-process for it, because the sub-process still would just have a step to say confirm yada yada yada, and not say field 1, field 2, field 3.
Maybe that itself is 3 levels. There's a conceptual process, and there's a logical steps by which you complete each step in the conceptual process, and then there are the task steps in order to complete each step in the logical process. We do that with conceptual,
Maybe.
logical, physical data. Why would we not do that with, process models and then specify them in levels in the BPMN spec?
Well, because the current spec has, in my favorite chapter 7.2,
I
in there
know.
that data modeling is not included,
Yeah, I know.
So they knew
Which
which can of worms you open here.
so
And
that
I'm
that leads
still,
me that means the next thing, Roland. Actually, first and foremost, do you have any other ways you want to see the models done before we move on to objects? Because
so
that's a big
I
one
would
today.
see just a summary, right? Roland's wish list, what I would want to see is rationalize the current 4 model types. Do we really need 4, or are 2 enough, right? So good idea number 3 and 4, but you had your run, bye-bye, right? The second thing is, and where you and I agree on, is I think we need the higher levels. We need the functional decomposition, right?
Mhm.
Um, and being able to describe functional decomposition in end-to-ends. Where you and I disagree is, do we need something below the process? And I think we disagree because I think that's way too prescriptive, and it gets very, very clearly into capabilities of an execution engine, right? Screen design and all that. I think that that's too detailed. I never recommend that to my clients, to go down to that level, but rather say, hey, you got a step. If you want to show how to do that in the system, take a damn screenshot and do call outs.
Yeah, but you don't like the idea of the orchestration, choreography, collaboration. That's too
I haven't seen
many
it.
different
I
things.
haven't
Yeah.
send it. That's the
So yeah,
point,
once again, please send us an email if at hello@whatsyourbaseline.com if you've ever used orchestration or choreography models. I'm fascinated what I've literally never done that. Maybe it's
Yeah.
just a gap in my knowledge, but I've been doing this for, I mean, almost 20 years now. So maybe I've been missing it for 20 years.
You're
I've been
that
doing it.
old?
I
You're
know.
that old?
I'm an old
Gee.
man. I've been doing this almost as long as BPMN has been a spec at all. So not a thing. But anyways, let's move on to the next piece of the puzzle here, because I want to talk extensively about object types. I mean, come on. So first and
Mhm.
foremost, let's start with the easiest one. I think that lanes and pools are dumb. I think that they conceptually are good, but the way that they're implemented is not good. And I've seen this in a couple of different tools, that lanes need to have specificity to them, because just defining a generic actor is just not sufficient. Um,
Mhm.
Oftentimes pools are wildly misused. I've seen pools used as the name of the process. I've seen pools used
Mhm.
as organizations, and then underneath them, the lane is the people. I've seen pools used as platforms, and underneath them, each application. Like they're not consistent in how they're used. And even if the spec defines what they are, it's not applicable to every scenario, and it's not applied universally.
So the pool is and that's very well defined, is the participant. When you think about a collaboration,
Mhm.
how 2 participants work with each other, right?
But
So
that's
that
not
could be,
specific enough.
well, hold on. The convention, the typical convention is that you put the process name in there, right? That is wrong according to
That's
the
wrong.
spec,
Yeah.
but everybody does it, right? It is that idea of, when you think about the collaboration, right, that you have those participants and which messages do they exchange, right? So one could think, and the spec doesn't say it, one could think that the conversation is the 30,000-foot level. The company talks to a vendor, the vendor talks to their suppliers, the supplier talks to the shipping company. Uh, this goes back to the company does have an additional exchange when it comes to the invoice to reconcile, whatever, right? So it could be that the 30,000 foot level. How do those different actors interact with each other? Again, haven't seen that in real life. Everybody goes into the collaboration diagram, and then you have a ton of different pools, black box, white box, whatever, right? Um, which I think could be sufficient. But I agree with you about, okay, a little bit more clarity around the pools,
And the
right?
lanes. And
The
like
lanes
the
is
lanes,
a different thing. The
different
lanes is a
issue.
different
Yeah.
thing. Right now in the spec, the lanes are just dumb containers. There could be people, there could be apps, there could be data, whatever floats your boat. And one could think about it, well, why do I have the grouping object versus the lane, right? So there's some inconsistency there. I agree with you that it would make sense to specify this more, and this would be more an after the fact, because every vendor does that. You know, you
They
have
do.
role lanes and app lanes and whatever lanes, you know, whatever their modeling platform uh, uh, provides.
But if every vendor is doing it, we need to make it part of the spec. And also,
I would
it
think
doesn't
so.
make any sense if you don't put that there, because seeing a name of something, you don't know whether or not that's a shorthand for a role or the name of a system.
Oh yeah,
By
yeah.
default, it is difficult to
Consistency.
understand. So
Yeah.
specify what your lanes are and extend the spec to include other things like organizational elements, which would be part of the lanes or part of associated with steps in the process.
Before I go there, I would expect, and we just spoke about it. Did we speak about? Yes, we did. You know, I would expect the same behavior that we see between business rule tasks and the decision models, right? I would want to
Yes.
see the same thing between any object in the BPMN spec, lanes as an example, so that you now can say, oh, I do have a role, for example, which is the typical thing that I see. I want to be able to map this to a role catalog, or I want to be able to map this to an org chart where I
Yep.
see the roles there, or a position to whatever, something else, but in the same mechanism that OMG says for business rule tasks and decision models.
Yes.
This now opens another can of worms. Will OMG be the ruler of everything modeling? I'm not sure if they're up for this, right?
Well, I
But
mean, they
we're on a
have
wish list.
historically been. Unless you listen, you want to start a nonprofit and compete with OMG, I'm on board, brother. But until then, I mean, I think that someone like the OMG or the OMG itself should be somebody who's a neutral party should be the arbiter of
Yeah,
this.
there's
I
something
believe.
called ISO. Have you heard about that? You know,
I do.
BPMN is
The ISO
BPMN
was
is an
associated
ISO
with
standard.
BPMN. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
BPMN is an ISO standard.
But so the next point here, though, I want to talk about. So lanes needs to be fixed. Pools and lanes need to be fixed and clarified. And in particular, we want to talk about extending adjacent elements. And one of them we've talked about before, organizational elements need to be part of the spec. And there's two reasons why. Number one is from a lane perspective to define the actor involved. Number two is associating with them with process steps. So in BPMN, great question. How do you say that this particular process requires a person to chime in or support the execution of it? Well, it's very hard to do so. There's like lots of different call out, lots of different methods people do. Or you can simply attach them as part of the execution to say that they're also involved. Somebody's responsible for somebody else supports it.
Distinguish two use cases. The first use case is documentation, right? You wanna show, for example, the RACI
That's
connections
you're getting
between
where
role and
you get what I'm
task,
putting down.
right?
Yeah.
So you wanna do this. Well, the current spec says, and I forgot the chapter, but it explicitly says you can extend your BPMN diagrams with whatever you want, as
That's a
long as
cop out.
you don't change the objects and shapes and all that stuff that are specified in this document. So you could, right? And I know tools who does that, right?
Yeah. But put it part of the spec. We know it's important. Put it in.
Hold on. The other thing is from an execution perspective, because you create code that's used for orchestration. I think that opens, and again, I don't want to call Matusz again. Third time is a charm. Matusz, tell us, what are the implications of having an additional role, responsible, accountable, must be informed of blah, 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 the RACI. What are the implications for the execution? I guess there is a reason for it because there's always two to tango, right?
It's true.
One is the guys who have their little wish list in a diagram. The others are the guys who have to put it in bits and bytes and create an execution engine that actually can work with that gobbledygook.
But if I can interject here briefly, Roland, because in some other ways that's kind of a cop out too, because the truth is any execution engine that's reading a file coming in from a source like a BPMN .bpmn extended file can pick and choose what they're going to use as they design their automation. And so if it exists in the spec, it does not mean that they are required to use it. They can simply ignore everything with a tag that isn't process step or call activity or
Mm.
whatever. Like they can ignore
Mhm.
all that stuff. But it's this idea of cooking once and serving many. Your one BPMN model, you don't want to have to recreate it when you're talking to people and recreate it when you're talking to systems. You want
But
one model people can read and systems can strip out and use what they want.
now
Why
I'm
not?
hyperventilating. Now I'm hyperventilating. I had those I had those long coffee-stained conversations with 20 million stakeholders to agree on who's doing what, to stick with that example, right?
Yeah.
And it was so we got that half-baked compromise and everybody signed off on it. So it took me forever. And then you're telling me an execution engine should simply ignore it because it can't do it?
But it was never designed for an execution engine. That was a design for
Of
an
course.
organizational segmentation responsibility.
Of
And you've already
the
fulfilled
BPMN,
your purpose.
but the BPMN spec is designed for execution. That's their main purpose.
But we can no longer hide behind that because the reality of how it's being used and the desire for people to use it this way is to document business processes that
So
aren't just for execution.
are you proposing now two different, well, I don't want to use the word class because it uses the word class in the spec, but two different types of objects that you now have as a business analyst to specify an object that is executable and an object that is for documentary purposes, like the racy stuff?
That already exists in the BPMN spec. Remember that you can segment out different task types in BPMN. They already have that. Manual task
Every
is
task type.
already a type of type. Ah, so they already thought of it, Roland. What they did is they went halfway, and we want to say go all the way. So I
Okay,
want to finish
move,
the
move
other types
on,
of
move
auxiliary
on.
information.
Nothing to
Yeah,
see
yeah.
here. Move on.
So organizational elements, I want applications and automations, particularly when we look at like RPA and AI. Like I want application objects to be able to place on the model either as a lane or as an auxiliary object tied into a step in the process in order to define how it's going to be executed. That includes traditional automations, RPA, and a little bit later we'll talk back about what was said about AI, or even capabilities in order to define the requirements.
Are we talking execution versus documentation again here? Or
We
are you
are. We're talking. I'm
proposing,
talking about
or are
documentation
we,
here.
hold
Yeah.
on. Yeah, documentation is fine. I was wondering if you're now proposing, because you mentioned RPA and AI and all that type of stuff,
Mhm.
are you proposing a flavor of the XML-based standard that then would, in the AI example, would say, oh, this goes into an N8N? Because I think that is too much to chew. If we stick with that
Sure.
execution in a BPMS
Mm,
versus documentation, I'm with you. Move on.
sure.
Nothing to see here.
But here's the thing,
Mhm.
Roland. Eventually, and not even not very far away, like very soon. I already know of companies doing this. We are going to be training our agentic AI off of a BPMN models. In fact, companies are already doing that. So the question is, how can I lay out to an agentic AI that this step is required to be completed in a certain way? And that's actually, once again, I'll refer back to our good friend over there, Pedro, who had specifically, we'll put it in the show notes again, a request that call activities are black box reusable sub processes showing the artifacts necessary for AI. And like that's going to be fantastic to define. And also, when the agents go through and scrub this model and say, "Hey, is this like what's relevant for me to know, and how do I execute my processes?" They'll see where they're called out specifically. So, there are elements that I think do lead into AI automation, whether we want them to or not.
Yeah, I get a little bit of heartburn here because there's two
Of course,
two different
it's a
things.
lot.
One
It's a
is
lot. I know.
one no 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 no. One is there a way, a standardized way to depict a process and certain aspects of the process so that it's standardized that an AI can be trained on this? Right?
Uh-huh.
To stick with the racy example, right? Yes, the spec would include this. The AI would learn it. If it's this connection, it means this. If it's that, it means that. Right? I think that's doable.
Yeah.
Where I get my heartburn is when it comes to actually doing stuff. And this is more about, and we discuss it in the episode with Tony, is about the attitude that AI, my new high horse, is a co-worker, which I think is stupid, as you all know. Um, but everything happens in a black box. I do not think that you can get away as an organization to say, hey, we got those processes, but we have those blind spots in our processes because we hired Mr. Gemini or Mr. Claude to do this. This is reckless, reckless. And I hope
Right.
that every regulator will smack you, not just the wrist on your fingers, but smack you for doing this. So the question is, how can or should the standard support this? And that's why I make that distinction between depiction to train an AI, this is what's going on, what the intent is, versus the actual execution. And I don't know, and that's above my pay grade, if that's desirable or doable to put this in the spec as an executable code. Because I think, and then I get away from it. I think the whole space there is so far so fast moving that there is
Yep.
no consensus on this yet. Maybe in the future. Let's talk about in 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Let's see where we are there. But
Sure.
what's very well defined is maybe not explicitly correctly executed in the BPMSs is the BPMN orchestration semantic that Bernd mentioned in our previous episode.
Mhm.
I think this is where it's very helpful. It's a clearly defined use case. Yes, BPMN can do this. Can it be extended? Should it be improved? Yes. There's always something to tweak. But
Sure.
it's you're opening with the AI and RPA and whatever other forms of automation, you're opening another can of worms. And if I was OMG, I'm not sure if I would take that on. Right. But
We
then the
we
question
we
is,
we have different appetites, you and I, my friend.
how? No, no,
And
no.
I'm a dreamer. I want to see everything, right?
The question is, do you do the same thing that we discussed before? Do you create an interface where other
Sure.
specs can plug in? Right.
Well, but no, I no. Actually, that's a good question. I would argue that I want this to be one spec. I would want it to be one spec. If I was having my druthers, as I like to say, it'd be
It's already
one spec
500
and it's
pages.
comprehensive. Yes, but the way in which you use it, it might take 500 pages to describe it, but the way in which you use it and the way in which people are trained on it doesn't take 500. You don't have to read all 500 pages. You train them on the relevant parts, but those relevant parts come from the superset of how you define it explicitly, particularly the technical components of it. So I do want to go to the last piece of the puzzle of the objects.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Only just to put some shade on the spec. Only if the spec was written well, because
Wow. Wow.
it's
Get wrecked.
inconsistent.
The Roland
It's
Volt shade comes out.
inconsistent. Come on, it's inconsistent. My pet is every business analyst says a gateway is a decision point. Hell
Yeah, no,
no.
it's not true. Yeah, I
Hell
understand
no.
it.
Right? And in almost everywhere in the spec, it says, and I translate here, it says the gateway is merely routing the token. So the decision needs to be made in a task. Except, and I will tell you not where, except in one space, in one sentence, in the damn 500 pages, where they put some shade on it. So from a manufacturing perspective, the spec could need a little bit of QA to be consistent.
We agree very much on that. So the next piece of puzzle here I wanted to keep talking about is the idea of risks and controls, data elements, and other types of things like customer interactions, those are auxiliary elements that do tie directly into process. And I know, I'll start with data because that exists already. But I think that the data is not that well defined, and the relationships between data and processes isn't defined sufficiently to try and understand where and how that data is created, read, updated or deleted. Nor is it built to tie in with other types of data models, like IE data models that will help to serve as a data library, a business object
Hmm.
library. So
Hmm.
I think that could definitely be used to be described better in the spec. The ones that are not
Again,
included at all are risks and
hold
controls,
on.
touch points and journey steps, those sorts of things.
There's two things. I think we need to distinguish again between what should be executable and what should not be executable. Oversimplified. I think that the customer interactions not executable, right? So
No,
documentation only, right?
yeah, of course.
Um, Risk and controls, yeah, could be, right? The control
Executing a control is executable.
could
Yeah.
trigger some automated stuff, you know. Um, Risks, no, right?
No, they're not
The,
executable.
the
No,
the bigger grief that I have is with data, because the assumption is that because
freely available.
BPMN doesn't do data modeling, that data is freely available during the execution of the process, which we all know is not the case, right? So how do you solve that? And then the other grief that I have, where I wish they would be a little bit more specific, is the visual representation, right? Because it's both are not, well, no, they make the distinction between non-persistent and persistent storage, right? So the document versus the database stuff.
Hmm.
But the assumption in the spec is once the instance of the process ends, the data goes away, right? So what I've seen customers use is they use the little database icon to represent a system, an application, which is not the case,
No.
right? So I would wish there was a little bit more clarity, right?
Hmm.
Maybe a different symbol, maybe just to say, hey, no. Now you use the document for this and the database for that, you know, to be a little bit more aligned on the reality that we see.
Yeah, and I also want to see the satellites around an object be able to describe the relationships between the elements that are attached. Like, for instance, I see a person, I see a system, I see a piece of data, and I can reasonably assume that that person is accessing that data through that system. And that gives me sort of a cross reference
Yeah,
of
just use
things.
EPC. Just use EPC. What you described
No,
is an
no, I
EPC.
want to I want to take the best of EPC, and I want to put it in BPMN in a way that is useful to everybody, but not too busy. We'll talk about that in a couple seconds. And that's what I'd like in the new 3.0 spec. So a couple more things to talk about here is number one is stuff that is usable by people who are doing projects or who are identifying problems and processes. So we talk about gaps and requirements. Those are important for me.
There's also the case, and I think Pedro wrote about, I think I read it in Pedro's article. Um, if not, shout out to you. Um, is the global event if something happens. And the example
Right.
was which made complete sense to me. Say you're a bank or whatever, you provide loans, multiple loans to a person, right? What happens if that person dies? Right? You need to stop the processes. Obviously you can send invoices to a dead person, right? But you never get paid, right? And whatnot. So the question is, how does that piece of information that your customer has passed, how does that go in? Is there a global input in there? That's more a data problem. And I know there's call activities, but then the call activity, you might have that customer interaction in many processes, right? So
Hmm.
that's also a thing. How do you interact with global events that are there, which I think is mostly data driven? Right. So that would be the other thing that I would add to the data topic. And
Hmm.
now, JM, please continue
No, it's
with
okay.
the other parts.
I agree. We go back to gaps and requirements because I use those all the time when it comes to, and like it's not just text annotations. That's not okay. So those aren't actually, like, you can't capture all those and keep them in a library and then use them for helping you to understand where you need to do work on your project and when the deliverables are completed. gaps in requirements. So requirements also pass over to applications from a functional requirement perspective or technical requirement perspective. Like those are useful, and gaps can be a sort of a library of stuff to do.
Yeah, how often, and honestly, I've seen that maybe a handful in my 30 years that I do this. How often do you actually use requirements in an architecture tool?
So that's a good question.
Because
I've seen it.
because
I've seen a lot of
because
people.
hold on.
Yeah.
Well, what I see is people using my least favorite tool, and Keith will chuckle now, Jira, right? They use tools like that. They come up with user stories. There's no integration that I've seen between architecture tools and agile tools, whatever, right? So all the requirements gathering happens either in a proper requirements tool, IBM has some of those, or it happens in one of those Atlassian tools, Confluence and Jira and all that stuff, or similar. So I don't know if the spec needs to have this. And maybe it's another example to say, yeah, we got a process, and I know we've done those bastardizations, where you say, oh, your process, that's your user stories. Task one is user story one, task two is user story two, task three is user. No, no. I would expect a hook again to say, oh yeah, there's a place where you can link to whatever thing you use. Right? Because the actual in real life, it's just like the same thing where don't want to put shade on too many, where vendors build in collaboration features in there and completely
Yeah.
ignore that organizations have Teams and Slack,
Hmm.
or other tools like that. So that's a waste of time. Build the damn integration to it. And
So you
there's
don't want to put a
others.
duplicate on the spec. I understand.
Yeah,
I
no, you don't.
I think what I think the spec could theoretically call it out, and that might be a benefit. And I don't see it. I don't see a downside, and I do see a lot of upsides. And I do have customers who use gaps or requirements
Mhm.
pretty extensively. I have a few of them who do that, and they literally have people who own those gaps or requirements, and they use them as a jumping off point for conversations and decision making and problem solving. So I like
It's
that.
all fine. Yeah, it's all
Talking
fine.
about other things that we're missing. I know that the group objects exists in BPMN, but what I don't see is phases or process segmentation. I do see that in like Visio diagrams where they have like a block and it's a phase, and then or some like automation tool front end modeling platforms have like phase segmentation, but that's not a part of the BPMN spec proper. And yeah, I would like to see something like that,
Hold on, does it have a semantic? So if you put that in, Biz Agile, for example, has those
like
milestones,
milestone. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But the question is, for me, a milestone has a well-defined entry and exit criteria.
Mhm.
So while the group is just like what it is, do I like the representation? No, I would love to have it shaded, semi-transparent, whatever, and not just a dotted line around something. But anyways, the group is just a visual highlight. A text
Yes.
annotation is just what it says. Put some words to it for clarification. By the way, JM, don't forget to take your milk when you go out of the house, right? So
Yeah,
it's
it's
those
a
little
communication
reminders.
method, right?
Yeah, it's a
Like it's
communication.
like don't knock communication methods, particularly with people. That's all we have, right?
But it's different than a milestone with well-defined entry and exit criteria.
Sure,
And then the
sure.
question would be, do the events start and end events, are they sufficient? Right? Because when you think about the end event, invoice is paid,
Hmm.
does that need some extension to say, okay, hereby I formally certify that it meets this milestone criteria, or do you need another object type in there?
It's a good point. Also, we didn't even start on the events because the BPMN spec has a lot of event types, and in a lot of places, those are more confusing than they are actually helpful, except in the case of automation where you actually need to have the specificity on events. But that's a longer conversation I want to
No, but
have.
that's why the BPMN spec defines the different classes of
Yeah, and
objects,
like
and says,
non-interrupting.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, that's easy. But I'm thinking about the intermediate event intermediate. Damn it! What's the Pentagon called? Event-driven
Yeah,
event? I forgot.
yeah,
I
yeah,
forgot
something
the
like
term.
that. Yeah,
Anyways, so it just says no. In the simple class, just use the non, right, and you're good. If you go to execution, use the full spec, right? And I can definitely see for automation purposes that you need all the semantics. I actually like that because you can be more precise than, for example, in an EPC where you have one event type, right?
fair.
That's not enough.
That's
So
no, I agree. I agree that but that's why I'm saying we're not touching like you need to have more of them. Rather, you need to have them. This is a practice conversation with people
and
who
I
need
can
to like
agree that
train people.
it can be confusing, right?
Yes.
Even
Yeah.
I don't get the names right. Yeah.
And that's actually leads me to a different sort of thing because it's not just end events and start events. I just dislike how people use off page connectors or even on page connectors in the case that it's like a but that's in the spec of BPMN off page connectors and I don't like them. I don't like them. Uh, I think that we're calling other things.
There is no off-page connector. What you're referring to is the little intermediate event that has an arrow in there.
Yes.
And that is meant for creating clarity in a complex model, which is always in your nomenclature in page. So it's only a way to connect different pieces of a model because you end up in a lack of space, right? To say, hey, this ends down here, but oh, by the way, we continue up here. So it's always on the same page, if you will.
So, well,
What
link
you
in
call,
like I'm looking at the spec specifically.
yeah,
Linked
it's the link.
intermediate events
Yeah.
are on page 252 says they can be used as an off-page connectors for printing a process across multiple pages.
Yeah, for printing, but it's still the same model. What you're talking
Right,
about is, at least I assume, is, and what I've seen people using is when they try to daisy chain different
right, yeah.
diagrams together.
That's what
That
I
is
am
to
referring
me,
to.
that's the
Yeah,
off-page thing. And for that, I think the event is perfect,
but
right?
the way
That
that it's used is not it's not
your
consistent.
end event is my start event, right?
Sure.
And what I do when I work with certain tools, I change the method. So
Mm,
in the tool that I use the most, it's actually not allowed to have an assignment. And now I gave away which I mean, to have an assignment between an event and a process. And I think it's just nonsense. I just allow that. Hopex allows that. Other tools allow that. So I tweak the method. I tell my clients, hey, I committed a crime here, but it's good for you. And they all say, of course, because then I click on that little thing and it opens another diagram. So maybe some vendors need to be less Catholic, in how they implement it.
fair and fair.
Yeah.
So that's for me. That's a lot of the objects. Obviously connections. We talked a little bit more about racy or RASI before. That's the
Hmm.
responsible, accountable, consulted, informed, or with supports. And that just comes with creating relationships with people and process. CRUD matrices for data interactions, risk occurrence and control execution connections, IT support connections. How are those
Yeah.
related to processes? So the ecosystem of objects around the each of the tasks, we need to have a standard for the definitions for how those relationships work. And once again, like I believe it is the responsibility of BPMN, if it is being used as a communication method for people, to tell them in people language how elements that they need to know about work with the process that they're using. That's just I believe that,
If you go down that path, yes.
which I believe they should.
If you stick with the current focus, the current scope, then it's moot.
That's why I say we need to change the scope, and
Mhm.
that's I think a good place for us to sort of cap off our conversation today because you've seen a lot of asks for the change of scope. You've seen a lot of the things we'd like to use in BPMN3. I'd like to pass it back to you, our audience. Do you think you would use a BPMN3? Do these elements matter to you? If so, which ones are most important? Send us an email, let us know. Yeah, I absolutely need this because it's important to communicate with my stakeholders with this type of object. So we'll leave you for a moment to think about it. Maybe write us an email and come back with our final thoughts and conclusions for the episode.
And welcome back. So, JM, this is a long episode already.
It's a long episode. My goodness.
We haven't
we have a lot to say.
we haven't spoken about the ultimate question that comes to mind. Do we need a complete rewrite, or can you fix what we have right now? And I don't
That's a
want to
tough
I don't
one.
want to go into the detail here, but what I've seen is vendors, because of the situations where the spec is not as specific as it should be, that vendors did their own stuff on the modeling as well as on the execution side, right? So my question that I would have to our listeners, right, that's the third call to action, completely unusual for us, would be, is there a need for a new standard? And how should that standard be constructed? Little mini specs that then will be orchestrated, or one monolith? And then the other question is, do you need to have the new spec police, right? That say, oh, vendor A, you're just allowed to use this standard if you have a big certification by us, the standards committee. Oh, and by the way, how does that new standard become an ISO standard? Right. So these are all things that I would be curious to get your, dear listeners, your opinions on that, because I know a couple of people who are thinking about that.
And hopefully you're thinking about that too now, as people who work in our industry or who are interested in this, in the kinds of things we do. And this turns it back to you. Listen, Roland and I have had a lot of fun waxing poetic about the different things we want in this, whether or not it's the different models or the objects or the connections that would make a BPMN 3 more applicable today than ever before. But you have the power now. And so this is your time to go email us, hello@whatsyourbaseline.com, go to LinkedIn, leave a comment on this particular episode, go to What's Your Baseline, check out other episodes, the things we've written, the show notes for this, and let us know what you think about it. Because the truth is that we're in a time of great transition. AI as a technology has thrown a lot of things upside down. And if it's the spur for BPMN 3.0 finally being a thing that people want to move forward with, that'd be fascinating. But we'd like to get your opinions and thoughts. And I think for this episode in particular, because it's so contentious, Roland, I think we might want to actually make a couple of posts with comments back from our audience, because like that those kind of thoughts are super useful. So send them in.
You put a high hurdle on it. You know what happens if nobody sends us comments? Do a blank graphic, like problem solved. Nobody wants to know
problem's
anything.
Still not solved though. So go to those sources. And once again, thank you for coming along on this ride with us. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. We certainly have. And I'm excited to hear all of your thoughts about what would make the best BPMN 3.0 for you. And until then, I've been J.M. Erlinson.
And my name is Roland Wold.
And we will see you in the next one.